No doubt
You
about that.
know what's interesting was I
Yeah.
noticed that on the Ralph Moore podcast,
Yeah.
they their podcast was 25 minutes, and there was part 1 and part 2. So
Mhm.
they were like, I think we could start doing 30-minute podcasts and not have a problem with it.
Yeah, so my experience, if you go back and look
Uh-huh.
at our statistics,
Uh-huh.
part 1s and part 2s don't typically do very well
Isn't that interesting?
in our numbers. We did it a few times, like, early on, and maybe
Yeah.
we could revisit it.
Mhm.
But, like, I remember one of them, like, it was significantly lower, part 2 was way lower
Very interesting. People are like,
than
"Yeah, I
all.
got it. I got it."
Yeah, I got the idea. I don't need to
Yeah.
listen to it again.
The thing about it is maybe um, I did have one guy mention to me, and this is just one guy, but I did have one guy, new listener. He said, "Man, I love your podcast. I had to do it in chunks because it's long.
Mm, mhm.
So, I mean, like an hour for people that are like younger people, they'll
Yeah,
just listen to the whole hour or whatever. But like he said, I listened to it. He said I listened to the first half of it driving to work, and then I listened to, or he said the first part of it, then I listened to the next part of it on the way home from work, and then I just finished it. So he had to like listen to it in 3 parts because it was like an hour long.
interesting.
So I'm
Maybe
thinking,
we could get some feedback today from some
I know
people.
that would be a good deal. Like, would a 30-minute podcast be a better time frame so that you could, so that people could actually listen to it in chunks,
Yeah. No, I
you
like that.
know?
Oh, you know what I didn't do? I gotta go do the gram. I didn't do the gram today.
Boy. Oh, we're side by side. I can tell.
Yeah, and I messed up last week. Normally, I don't understand why it didn't do it, but normally it prompts me
Uh-huh.
to do the different view. Um,
He says, Jay Jones said, I just played my hour-long podcast on 2X.
there you
That's what I
go.
do. That's what I do. I
Absolutely.
was listening to one the other day, and it sounded like I was listening to Mickey and Minnie Mouse have a conversation. It was hilarious.
That's awesome. All right, let me set up Graham here real quick.
The funniest.
Not Scott Graham, Instagram.
Yeah. Um, if you set up Scott Graham, you're just introducing him to preach a masterpiece.
Right.
I was listening. It was funny. I was doing Kevin Wallace. I listened to his podcast, and usually while I'm mowing for some reason, I don't know why, but anyway, I had it on 1.5 time speed, and it sounds funny because he preached, he kind of had that voice like this. He preached, and it's like, somebody bring. It was sounding like that. And I'm like, that was interesting.
That's awesome. That is awesome.
He sounded like a guy squealing his tires. For real.
Yeah. Instagram is just, he can just get up and just preach a masterpiece. That's what Instagram is. Oh man. All right. So we're getting a little bit of a late start, and
Oh boy.
I love what you said. Just
Yes.
I think we ought to prep people.
Yeah. If
that
I get Schefflered,
if you get Schefflered, there's a reason why. I think that would be so amazing, man, if you got Schefflered.
Jeff Glick said 30 minutes. 30 minutes is long enough.
It's just enough for a good sermon, but too long for a bad one, or whatever. That's what I said.
Right. That's the statement.
So, okay.
All right. I
The-
think
The
that's
peoples have spoken.
the peoples have spoked.
Here's the deal, Ken.
Yeah.
When you've got so much that you just
Mhm.
want to say, it's hard to get in 30 minutes. You know what I'm saying?
That's 15 minutes per Dillingham, he says. That's crazy.
That's
crazy.
definitely not happening.
No. You know what's funny is the 30-minute idea, 35-minute zone. What's interesting about that is I do think that it does fit well within people's sort of their kind of listening as they drive, commuting. I don't know that many people listen to podcasts super like meditatively.
Right.
Like a lot of people listen to podcasts but the thing about it is we have some podcasts that 60 minutes have been really good because it's the topic digs into it. And then we've had some podcasts that 60 minutes is just because we were talking about
Nipsey Russell.
right. NFL flag football for the Super
I was
or for
gonna
the Pro
say
Bowl.
if you extract out the beginning, I mean, it's really probably like 40 minutes.
It's true. And really only probably 20 minutes of really usable material.
Exactly right.
So that's what it is. We operate
That
off
is
the
right.
20-20-20-20 rule.
That's
20 minutes of just,
stupidity.
yeah, 20 minutes of really good material and 20 minutes of meandering till we find the good material.
I
It's
love
like
it.
hunting.
I love
See,
it.
it's like hunting. No hunter says, no hunter says I was out in the woods for 3 hours today. They just
Yeah.
post a picture of the buck.
Right.
It took 3 hours to find the buck. We're just hunters.
That's exactly right.
It takes us 3 hours to find a trophy buck. Give us a break, people.
Sometimes
We're podcast hunters.
and when you've got ADD, it's very easy to get sidetracked by other things that are going on, so
Speaking of which,
yeah.
the second reason I was late today, besides
Yeah.
the fact that I was working on a deck and looked down and realized what time it was, and the second reason was because my wife goes, "Babe, I need you to help me." I said, "What?" And she's like, "I can't let the dogs out." I'm like, "What's going on?" I thought something like coyotes in the yard or
Got to shoot
whatever.
something.
The cat had brought up a squirrel.
Oh, boy.
So went
Let's
today
go.
with the whole ADD thing and squirrel. Like literally, I bagged a squirrel today.
So awesome, man.
I didn't bag a buck, but I bagged a squirrel.
If there's a reason for an ADD guy to be late, that is the prime reason right there, bro.
Squirrel, man.
That's the
I
prime
mean,
reason.
I was like,
Like,
I'm sorry, bro. I was on my way in and I was ready to leave.
literally
And I
squirrel.
squirrel.
That's awesome, man.
That's so brilliant.
Hey, can you give us a little weather report from our chief meteorologist, Ken Bastarkey?
Aha. Chief Meteorologist Ken Bastarkey checking in today. He says it's 75 degrees with a high of 85 degrees and very, very beautiful weather in northeastern Ohio. But it's going to be a humid day. Make sure you get your suntan lotion, get outside, and drink a lot of water.
Suntan lotion.
Suntan. Discuss sunscreen.
I think you just dated yourself on that one right there.
Get your Hawaiian tropic.
Throw on your Ocean Pacific shorts and
I sent a deal to this morning, a picture of some shoes to the girls today, and I said, "Hey, look what I just found."
yeah.
They were light gray with pink lettering, kangaroos tennis shoes that said Ruse.
Oh, the Ruse. Yeah. Nice, bro.
And the girls were like, so I sent them some white Nike girls Nike with the red swoosh, and they were like retro. And so anyway, I said, let me show you the shoes that were popular. And I sent it. I Googled, and lo and behold, Belk's or some southern department store, whatever, have them.
That's awesome.
Kangaroos. Yep.
I would absolutely right now, if I could find it, bro, I absolutely would wear the Ocean Pacific long sleeve shirt with Ocean Pacific on the sleeve with the turquoise hoodie, sleeveless hoodie, the turquoise sleeveless hoodie.
Pair of cargo shorts.
Oh man, boat shoes. I don't get the cargo shorts, man. I'll wear the boat shoes. I'd house my jeans.
Cargo shoes.
I'd house my jeans and bro, little Ocean Pacific, little Panama Jack. My God.
Have your little Hawaiian It wasn't called, that wasn't called Hawaiian Trop. What was it called that smelled like
Yeah, that's what it's
coconut?
called. Yeah, I think
Hawaiian
that's right.
Tropic.
Yeah, I think that sounds right.
All summer long, I could just remember mom smelling like coconut.
Right, exactly, man. Makes me want a snow cone for some reason.
Look at Jake Dog. Jake Dog Rodriguez says, wait, Ocean Pacific isn't cool anymore? No, it is. Like, that's what Chris is
That's what I'm
saying.
saying. Ocean Pacific and Panama Jack, throw it on big time. House your jeans up. Just let's go full 80s.
Jake Dog, listen, here's how we say it, man. Here's how we say it. If we're wearing it, it's in.
That's what I'm talking about. Tony Richards says, I have a pair of pony shores. Is he
Ooh.
saying shorts or shoes?
Wow, like Jersey Shores. Pony Shores. It's a show about thoroughbred racehorsing in Lexington, Kentucky. Pony Shores. Bro, that's so good.
The horses don't get along. They're fighting with each other.
It's, bro, the jokes write themselves. Oh, shucks.
Pony shores. Oh, man. That's so
Tony
awesome.
Richard just provided the best comic moment of the day today.
Oh, that is awesome.
It's all
And
down
this
here,
right
Bill,
here
from here, folks.
This is why the show is 60 minutes right here. This
For
is
real.
the explanation. Oh, man.
Exactly.
All right.
And we don't even have
Whew.
what was his name? Walter Cronkite. What was his name? The 60 Minutes guy. Anyway.
Oh, yeah. Man, I can hear his voice. Wallace?
Yeah. Right.
His last name is Wallace?
Wallace.
Something Wallace.
Yeah.
What was it? Okay, now I got to look it up because you got me
For real.
wondering.
It's
Mike
like
Wallace.
Mike Wallace. Yeah.
Mike Wallace.
Who's also a phenomenal dodgeball player. He just pins people to the wall. Mike Wallace.
For real. Oh, man, that's awesome.
Dude, for real, though, I don't want to jump right over the top of the pony shoes, though. I mean, that's...
Pony shoes?
That would be... Did pony shoes say pony, or did they have an emblem similar to Puma?
They had kind of it was like a check mark thing or something, wasn't it?
Yep. That was like a V-shaped deal.
Mm-hmm.
That's exactly right.
Absolutely, man. I think we need to have an 80s tribute show. Just bust them out. Bust out the New Balance, the Ruse. Come on, somebody.
We could do like the Mobilized Church Network, like make a play on ADD and call it 80s DD.
I like it. I like it. I told my kids the other day,
which is basically what we're doing right now.
For real. I told my kids the other day, every day of high school, every day, I wore basically like whitewashed jeans, probably. They were housed with boat shoes and no socks. I didn't care. There could be a foot of snow, didn't matter. Boat shoes and no socks every day.
It was cool. By the way, Jay Jones is pulling back the pure retro. He said Ruse were the bomb. Little zippers on the side for your lunch money and your front door key. For real, bro. That's so true, man.
That is awesome. I couldn't afford Ruse. So just, like a bunch of rich people walking around. Oh man. All right, let's go. You ready to go? You
do have a thing
today. So so if we do a 30-minute show.
Let's go. 30 minutes. Here we go. We're going to be done today, ladies and gentlemen, at 11. What is it? 13 till? So 17? 11:17. Here we go.
Yeah, ish. All right, here we go. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Mobilized Church Podcast. This is Chris Dillingham alongside my big brother, Ken Dillingham Jr. the third. Good morning, Ken. How we doing today?
It's good. And I saved something, even in all of our pre-show antics. I tucked this one away and didn't bring it up. It's just so that I could have something when you said, how's it going today? Today, Chris, for the first time in my life,
talk about it. I
have contacts in.
What?
I went and got contact lenses yesterday. I know a guy he used to be the head of the Ohio Ophthalmology Association or whatever they call it. And he retired and sold his business and whatever. And then he told me, he said, my wife brought me back out of retirement a couple of years ago. And I said, I said, she just couldn't stand you around the house. And he said, no, I was getting out of the house a lot. He said, I was golfing every day and whatever. He said, I think, he said she missed the spending money. So anyway, he's
back to work.
Yeah. It's awesome. And he said, Jay Jones.
No,
Jay
I was
Jones.
getting ready. I was saving that, man. I was
all
like,
right. Yeah. I was going to mention
vision.
it. I was going to mention it. Oh, here it is. And it's really cool though. There's 4 of you on the screen. So that's pretty cool. But so I was telling him, I said, man, look, I hate wearing glasses to golf. I hate it.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I hate doing any kind of activity. And he said, so we were talking about, he said, a lot of guys, he said, get more like a sports, get almost like a sunglass look. And then even if you want to, he said, you can just do your distance vision. And if you want to, you could do just a real thin line at the bottom to like write in your scorecard and whatever of your, like a bifocal. And I'm like, I know, but I just hate having glasses on. They're
same.
It's just they just go, the sweat comes down, and they go down my nose.
Distracting for me, 100%.
Hate it. And they give me a headache. They hurt behind my ears, etc. These today are readers. They're just readers because he didn't want to try me out with sort of the monovision where you've got one distance and one near.
Yeah.
He's like, I don't want to do that to your brain. And then there's ones called multifocal, but those are like pretty, like literally they take your prescription and they do a contact that goes like out in circles like a record. And your eyes are seeing all of it at the same time. Like you're seeing the close up and the far and whatever. And your brain just picks the part that it needs to see at whatever distance. He said they're really cool. And he said a lot of people can get used to them, but it'll take a while. He said, so why don't we just give you just distance only contacts? And then he said, you'll have to use maybe some readers or whatever for some of your up close stuff for now. But bro, amazing.
That's awesome, man.
Amazing. I'm telling you, like, even as far as like, like I'm looking, like maybe that far away. Right.
Yeah.
That's crystal clear. Like anything from like 4 feet and beyond is, which is funny because it's like, how long are your arms to be to 4 feet away? Well, I'm figuring like my eyes are over here and my arms are out here and I'm 6'2" and change. So whatever, 6'3". So there you go.
There you go. So I appreciate the explanation. You had me scared there for a minute. You had contacts and glasses, and I didn't know what in the world was going on there, bro. I thought maybe we were just busting out the goggles today or something. I don't know what's happening.
Yep. Just call me Rambus.
It's a disguise. Cops come in and check in on you. So that's awesome, man.
I don't want all of our podcast audience to see the bags under my eyes.
For real. Jay Jones says he did LASIK back in during COVID. And it's amazing.
I didn't know that.
I didn't either.
J-Dog, what you holding out on us, Bubba?
We need a picture of Jay with glasses. I've never seen Jay with glasses, I don't think. So
so Jay, check this out. This is so crazy. I was going to do LASIK, and everything that I studied said that they don't like to do LASIK past 55 for some reason. And I don't know why. Maybe he would give us a little bit of insight. I know he's not even close to 55 yet, but maybe, I don't know, maybe he had some insight on that. My thought was, well, I guess I'm just on the other side of waiting for cataract surgery. I thought maybe, what I'm saying? Like, maybe I'm like, well, I've passed the LASIK window up. I guess next they're just going to cut a hole in my eye and give me new lenses.
Yeah, next is
some cataract surgery.
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't even matter anymore after that. You reach a certain point, and what difference does it make, right?
I don't know. You notice I'm talking. You do notice I'm talking a little every now and then. You know what that is?
What is that?
We talked about Pony Shores, Jersey Shores. So every now and then I've just got to throw. Yeah, he said it liberated me. 52 now. They must be waiting for you. See, that's what I'm telling you. He's what he says. Thanks a lot, Jay.
He's auditioning for Pony Shores. Well, Pony Shores, you'd have to have the Southern accent. We drove through Lexington, Kentucky. That's where it'd be, right? Lexington,
Yeah,
Kentucky would
Lexington
be
area.
Pony Shores. That's awesome. You gotta go back and watch we had an interesting pre-show, so
It was good.
limit that. Well, that's debatable, but it was interesting, I think, like,
We
especially if you have
we
80s.
enjoyed it.
If you're interested in the 80s, go back and check it out. We had a good time with it anyway. So, all right, so our newfound goal is we're gonna try out and see if we can shoot for a 30-minute podcast.
Okay.
We'd love to hear people's feedback on that, if that'd make listening a little easier. It I'll just put this in, Ken, the caveat would be this: there are,
Uh-huh.
like you said, I think you said it right, there are topics that just 30 minutes is just not gonna get it done, and a part
Yeah.
1, part 2, I don't know
Yeah, we
is
can
gonna work,
kinda
so we'll just but today, I think we'll be okay, I think we'll be in good shape, so I'm gonna let you set up today's topic,
let's do that.
and
That's a great
we're
idea.
today we're gonna riff a little bit.
We are.
Just kinda riff a little bit. We've
Couple
had
of guitar players that people just you don't know. We got skills and talents that we don't let out of the bag often.
today's a jazz podcast. We're
We're
gonna do a little
riffers.
jazz. So I'll let you just go ahead and just get us rocking and rolling
Alright.
today.
Alright, so we had, Chris and I have, through the years, we've had some, um, like, connections, some relationships that we've built through our relationships with Exponential and some of the things that we've done, some of the doors that God's opened, and we just we're lifelong learners. We're both of us have sort of the motto of living a life of constant and consistent improvement, and so we want to know. I think one of the most important things that we can do as not, and I don't want to say Christians. I would just say as sort of practitioners anywhere in life. I think it's important for you to just to it's like kind of like continue education. You find out what are some of the new things? What are the things that are working? What are things that they're doing? Like sometimes, what are they doing in Europe? Like a doctor may say, hey, they found some real breakthrough treatments in Europe. We
Yeah,
haven't, whatever. And so I think one of the things that we've done is to say, let's look kind of outside the borders and boundaries of our tribe methodologically. Doctrinally we stay hemmed in. We're not looking
sure.
for anything. But I think our audience is, man, I think our audience is
Yeah.
mature and developed enough and advanced enough to be able to nuance that,
Yeah, we don't need to caveat that.
So anyway, with that being said, one of the people that we came into contact with during this journey is a guy by the name of Ralph Moore. Ralph Moore is noted as having begun one of the only true multiplication movements in North America. This is interesting
Right.
because there's places in around the world, China, and there's some in China and various continents that experience a multiplication or multiplication movement of a disciple making multiplication movement, missional multiplication. But really, there are no evidences of it in the United States,
Right.
with
Which
the
is crazy.
exception, I know, right? With the exception of somebody by the name of Ralph Moore. Now, Ralph Moore, kind of a unique guy, very unassuming. Anyway, he has a podcast.
Extremely unassuming.
He has a podcast, and one of his most recent podcasts uh, is a podcast about co-vocational church planting and some of those ideas. And in it, they really discuss. This is a great podcast, by the way, and we'll see that we get in the show notes or whatever. We'll get you the link to that podcast. But anyway, so today we're just going to riff off that and flow off that a little bit. This is the idea, is the missional challenge of 2024 is the missional challenge of the last days. setting up a need for us right now in our current context
Yeah.
to kind of reevaluate our approach at doing the mission, planning churches.
Yeah.
Do we need to take a look at what do we need to do it better? What do we need to do it faster? What do we need to do to, is there a way that we can plant churches that isn't as that is not as heavy on sort of structuring it, and by structure I don't mean organizational structure, I don't mean biblical government leadership structure. I'm talking about just structuring it in such a way that is a little bit cumbersome and
Mhm.
difficult to reproduce quickly.
Yeah.
Do we need to be looking for a model, a new model that is faster, more flexible, a new model that's capable of sort of taking a hold of unique and new challenges that arise when the Spirit moves? And I think some of that has to do with like having missionally mobilized people that are living on mission every day. I think it's going to require a new view of what it looks to sort of, what does a church plant look like? Do
Sure.
you have to have a building and music and worship and a church service for it to be an official church plant? So we're just going to talk about that today.
Yeah, absolutely. And this conversation, I mean, really, Ken, this is kind of the genesis for us, and actually kind of where it started. Actually, there we were at a conference and Ralph Moore was speaking.
Yeah.
It's kind of interesting because there's all these names of people that
Yeah.
and
People
they
had
were
written books
introducing.
and
Was
yeah,
it Michael Frost that introduced him, or was it Ed Stetzer?
it was Michael Frost.
And, and so, like, the joke was kind of like, all these other guys, and here there's a guy who is
Yeah.
the only example of multiplication in Western culture,
Yeah.
and nobody
Nobody
even knows
knows
who
him.
he is. Didn't
Yeah.
write a book about it, whatever,
Yeah.
and we've been in meetings with him, small group meetings, whatever, just super unassuming guy.
Like you
And so
probably wouldn't even know he's a pastor if you met him, you know.
you'd really have no idea.
You certainly wouldn't know he's a movement maker.
Right, but one of the part of the genesis for us
Yeah.
of this whole thing was literally around the world in every culture, there are examples of multiplication.
Yep.
South America,
Yep.
Central America, Africa, Asia, there are examples in all the other continents except Western culture
Yes.
that you have multiplication, and that idea and that concept. So there are some things culturally, I think, Ken,
Okay.
that facilitate the quick and widespread movement of like the spreading of the mission and the gospel. I think
Yep.
there's some cultural things that are in place in those places that
It's a good point.
facilitate a little bit better. And so when we start talking about this, like it'd be great. Yeah, well, we need to do what they're doing in Asia. Well, guess what? We're not in China. We're not in some of these other places where there are
Mhm.
some cultural things that are deeply embedded into our culture and have kind of intertwined itself into the way we do the mission, into the way we do church. And so when we start talking about some of these kinds of things, like it does challenge, it does bring up some conflict because those things become so deeply embedded. And this is why we started going on the journey of like, okay, here's the deal. The the apostolic church was designed in such a way to be effective in whatever culture it was placed into,
Mm. So
right?
we're gonna use the term here, what you just described. For those of you listening, we're gonna use the terms scalable and
Yes.
reproducible.
Scalable and reproducible. It
So those are the two things: is scalable and reproducible.
So when we start talking about like, kind of viewing things from the outside and whatever, we're not, like you said, we're not talking about message, we're not talking about doctrinal things and whatever, but we are looking at it saying, okay, what are some things that we need to do where we are in Western culture that makes it reproducible, that makes it scalable, that works in a metro area as well as it's going to work in a rural area or
Yeah.
whatever. So so that's really kind of what got us started on this journey was like, man, just because we live in this deeply embedded religious culture doesn't mean that the apostolic message doesn't work, that the apostolic
Good.
methodology doesn't work. We've got to find a way of how do we, not that we've got it all or whatever, but how do we start working our way back to that? And it begins with the mission. How do we do the mission? How do
Mhm.
we do church planning? How do we, like, all of those kinds of things are really just kind of intertwined in this conversation.
Hmm. Wow, that's so good, and I think so. All right, so let me ask you a few questions here, and let's go in here. Uh, I think that let's ask this. Let's talk about this, and I think this is a good way to really. I think this is a good way to really think about the idea of what we're discussing. Okay,
Mhm.
so I think that what I'd like to steer away from today is to say maybe steer away from the whole idea of, you know, why is it a problem? Why is it not working? Why don't we see it a lot in North America? Blah blah blah.
The anti-church movement.
We got plenty of podcasts in the past that you can go and listen to us,
Yeah,
talk about those kinds of things. But so today, so let's set it up in this kind of a way, and let me ask you a few questions, and maybe we can get some feedback from some of our audience today. But so when we're talking about an enhanced missional methodology, we're saying, all right, so what would a truly biblically aligned New Testament missional methodology, what would it look like in a modern context? What would an enhanced missional methodology produce? What would it be doing? And I don't, and again, I'm trying to stay away from what would it be doing better than what it's doing now.
sure.
But obviously, you have to look at it and say the challenges that we have in our world today. What are some of those challenges? Well, we've got we have less and less people who are interested in sort of a classical religious institutional brick and mortar type church expression.
Sure.
That doesn't necessarily mean that they're not looking for a church that has good gatherings and worship and those kinds of things. I think what we're saying is that there's a lot of people that are predisposed, particularly secular people who aren't. I think there's really three categories of people right now. There are those that are strongly Christian, highly religious. They've got all of the church discipline stuff. They believe that we need to go to church, we need to be connected and committed, and so on and so forth. I think there's a middle ground people that are sort of they're the unchurched or dechurched for whatever reason. They may have some Christian memory. They may have some past Christian memory. My grandparents went to church. My parents did. I just don't go to church. So they may be unchurched or dechurched. There may be people that are dechurched simply because they're like, I just don't, I don't, I'm not, I don't, I want something fresh and new. And then I believe there are people that are secular who are just simply not interested
Yeah.
in, at least in the idea of what we say church.
Right.
But yet we've talked a lot about they're interested spiritually, they're interested in spiritual conversations, they're interested in a lot of these kinds of things. Okay. So when we're talking about we're a lot of these things are creating the new kind of harvest field. You mentioned a lot of things aren't in place in North America that are in place in other cultures. A lot of things like challenges aren't in place, like China, the underground church that has to, they have to operate in a very different way. It's in Africa. It's a different, although I did talk to an African missionary here recently that said that right now in Africa, they're finding that there is a move towards the big cities. And they said about 70% of their people 70% of the people in Africa are now moving into or live in and around the big metro areas. And they
Mhm.
said 70% of our churches are in villages.
Wow.
Absolutely crazy that American missionaries, the model has produced what it is here in the United States,
Isn't that
a
wild?
predominant rural. So anyway,
That's crazy.
different conversation for a different podcast, I suppose. So what would you say, Chris, when we're talking about, all right, so if somebody says, all right, so you're saying we need some enhanced missional methodology, what would it produce? What are some things that would produce? What would it do better that also leverages and matches the moment better?
Yeah. I think the first element is the personal discipleship piece, which I know is gonna sound kinda cliche because we talk about it all the time, but ultimately, Ken, this is why we harp on it so much is because
Yeah.
that's where it all begins. It all has to start at that personal discipleship level because when you are and I'm not suggesting that people are not living as disciples, but as we've addressed on numerous occasions,
Yeah.
kind of the idea and the concept of, you get born again, and then your job is to come and be a good saint, sit on the pew, and
Right.
and
Right.
become a
Yeah.
good member,
Yeah.
which we talk
Right.
about being a good member, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the active participation in a person's discipleship where you're consistently and constantly being transformed, you're growing in your walking relationship with God, you're being challenged. And the reason that that's so important is we've used all kinds of methods and methodologies to motivate people to get engaged in the mission.
Mm-hmm.
And what we found is in most places, in most churches,
Okay.
people are not actively engaged in the mission.
That's so true.
That's just a statement of fact. And it's again, it's overgeneralization, I'm sure, but I'm just saying you and I both evangelize. We've been connected, and every pastor is constantly trying to find new ways to get people engaged in the mission. If you're living as a disciple of Jesus,
Mm-hmm.
then the things that are important to him become most important to us.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
So I think that is the place where it all begins. So if you're living as a disciple of Jesus, now all of a sudden, not all of a sudden, but now the things that are important to him are important to you. You start living on mission. As you start living on mission, we should start to see missional overflow. And I love how you say it. Missional overflow results in demographic,
Mm-hmm.
geographic,
Mm-hmm.
and
And some,
language groups,
yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Geographic, demographic, and some church growth. Like some of it
And church
overflows
growth.
back into, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And so we should start to see that where you're going to have so right now the primary method for so in the context of church planning, the primary method of church planning is, and we had somebody commented,
Yeah, who was that?
Jane James commented and said that she has two sons that have been church planners, co-vocational, and the primary
Says it'd be
methodology for
extremely
that
hard to have a full-time job, be financed for church-related costs, building equipment. Yeah. Okay. So here's where we're going with this. This is good. That's a great thank you for that
segue
comment.
into it,
Yeah. Yeah.
absolutely,
Yeah.
has been pick a spot where you feel
Mhm.
God's called you to go.
Mhm.
You go get a building,
Mhm.
start having services, try
Yeah.
to get people to come to your services and try to build it. And as she mentioned there's the challenges of having a job and working full time and having to pay for all the resources and things. And then feeling like, now I'm not saying that we are, but feeling like we're there's some level of competition. How can you compete with the church that has all the things, all the ministries and all the resources and all that kind of stuff? That's been our primary methodology, which can that's awesome. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't necessarily do that, but it steals away the greatest
Mm.
resource that we have of doing the mission, which is people living on mission every
Mhm.
day.
Yeah. Transformed people.
Yeah.
So, all right. So enhanced missional methodology
Mhm.
would produce more motivated disciples. That's
Absolutely.
something you'd say. Okay. So a second thing that I thought of was I think enhanced missional methodology produces a more flexible model.
Mhm.
I think another benefit of what we're talking about today when we're talking about enhanced missional methodology is I think that it would produce um, the enhanced missional methodology would produce a more flexible model. In other words, it's not very flexible when the church planting model is we're going to go to a city, find a building, start having church services.
Yeah.
I'm not, we're not dogging that. Like that's been a successful church planting model in North America. And we're not
But it's
talking.
no, but it's taken people, Ken. It's taken somebody who just has bulldog determination and just goes in and says, we're gonna, you know, gut it out and just make it all happen. And I'm not saying that there's not a need for that, but what I'm saying is it really kind of takes an exceptional leader. We've had a lot of other examples in situations where that doesn't work out so great.
Okay, so let's throw this out here because you just emphasize someone with a bulldog determination. It's very interesting that you basically highlighted the fact that that form of church planning requires a person.
Mhm.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
It's not missional overflow. It's
Right.
not a group of people. And I know, yeah, I get it. You could say, well, what about Paul? Paul was a person. And again, we understand that there will be some classic church planting type, scenarios. I believe that you probably could point to many examples of somebody who just went to a town and just hung a sign out on a storefront, started having services, and that was
Yeah.
that's the way they did it.
Sure.
And we're not saying like, in like the United Pentecostal Church that we're a part of, that's been, whether you're Methodist or whether you're Baptist or whether
Absolutely.
that's just simply been the North American model. It's not, I don't necessarily believe it's a biblical model. I just believe that it's sort of the religious institutional North American model, is,
That's what I was hitting at Western culture.
Yes. Okay. So that's a flexible piece. Why don't we hit a second here on, Jay Jones. I love, he said, disciples living transformed by Jesus who gather together to worship and grow and are mobilized in their oikos to make disciples of others. I mean, great point. He also made a statement that said many believers have only stale bread to share because
Mhm.
they aren't living transformed lives. There's a difference between a follower and a disciple, or a member and a
Yeah.
disciple. I love that. And then finally, when he said we can't compete on the consumer level. And I think this is a thing. Like, I think this is where, when you couch, like, who is your audience, or who's your harvest field? Okay. Well, if we say our harvest field is lost people, then what we're finding over and over and over is lost people aren't looking for another better consumer model.
Sure.
That was our point when we said that they're not, you got these three groups of people. So the churches that are competing on a consumer level are probably competing for consumer Christians, right?
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
if our harvest field are those people that are currently either unchurched or are completely secular, then I think that what we're looking at is a flexible model that matches the audience that we're trying to reach. Finally, Jay said Paul established churches among gathered believers.
Yeah, that's where I was gonna go.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. Is
He didn't go start churches,
Yes, he did
right?
not go start churches. He went and he went into places and shared the gospel, and people listened, and people were transformed, and they told their friends, and all of a sudden a movement started. The result was these people who are now, in an most organic possible way, the church gathered together as the ecclesia.
And I think there's an awareness, Ken. I think there's awareness even at the institutional level. There's an awareness of that it needs to happen. And again, I'm not dogging any method or whatever, but like church planning, in the last 20 years, there's been kind of that shift where like, okay, we're gonna go into a city and we're gonna start, like doing preview services and we're gonna
Yeah.
start building relationships before we do a big launch. Now, again, it's definitely it's definitely it's institutional in that it's centered around services. It's centered around this, the launching of the church and whatever. But I think it's an awareness of like, man, it's hard to go in and just start having church without having any kind of relationships.
Uh-huh.
And so I think there's an understanding of that. The challenge that we've faced is because of what you said earlier. It's not just our tribe or organization. It's all of the mainline churches.
Yeah.
This has been the way they've done it for literally, a couple 100 years of launching churches all over the country, and so that's become a deeply entrenched part of our culture. So shifting that and changing that is really kind of the challenge. Again, I go back to what we said earlier, like that model, it limits the power of the greatest resource we have, which is transformed disciples living on
100%.
mission.
100%, bro. You know what's funny when you said that? What's
Yeah.
funny is I was thinking about something like, okay, let's give some examples of like starting a new. Okay.
Mhm.
So if we say,
Mhm.
I'm going to start a new car dealership. Well, in a carnal, fleshly, human consumer perspective, in a business model perspective, what you would say is, well, you can't start a new car dealership by just simply making everybody car salesmen, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. Why? Because you have a particular product you're trying to sell, right?
Yeah.
And so what do you have to do? You have to buy a building. You got to have a car lot. You got to have people who are experts in selling those cars. You set up those. You have to have all those cars on the car lot. You have to have a place for people to come, and then when they come, they're looking at the cars, and then somebody's trying to sell them on a car.
Yeah.
You wouldn't start a new grocery store, even though there's probably an example of maybe that this is even more possible of starting a new grocery store by saying, you could have almost like a farm market type deal, but still it's, you know, uh, it's, I think that we look at um, um, disruptors like
Sure.
Amazon.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Amazon is a disruptor, but it's still a consumer model where even though it's not a storefront model where there's people, or where there's like a hard products there in the store,
Yeah.
whatever. I think those things help us to see why we sort of are predisposed to say, well, if you're going to start a new church, it's like starting a car dealership. It's like starting a new grocery store. It's like you've got to have a place, you've got to have somebody, you got to have a manager, you got to have backing, you got to have funding, and you got to have a product and so on and so forth. And the reality is, okay, so does our church planting model look more like that? Or
Yeah.
does it look more like the Jesus movement?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, anyway, with that being said, I think the thing that you just hit was all right. So, let me hit the ones we've talked about here. So, enhanced missional methodology produces motivated disciples who make disciples.
Yeah.
It is a faster it's a faster form. In other words, it scales up faster.
Sure.
It's capable of um, Paul finding certain disciples in Ephesus.
Yeah.
Okay, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
um, right. Paul found certain disciples in Ephesus. Okay, what was that? That was the beginning of the church expression. Here's what's interesting. Well, let me keep going. All right, it's more flexible. It's capable of It's capable of capturing every possible opportunity.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
and it multiplies organically,
Mhm.
right, through all people. Um, So when we're talking about enhanced missional methodology, if we're looking at an enhanced missional methodology, I think that what we're saying is that we're looking for a model that's faster. We're looking for a model that's more flexible. We're looking for a model that multiplies organically. We're looking for a model that is filled with motivated missional disciple makers that are just working this thing in their daily lives.
Yeah.
So while it in some ways postures against sort of a classic church planting model, it also opens up to the opportunity of having co-vocational leaders.
Yeah.
It it it
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
doesn't sit in this mindset or this framework, sort of an old framework that said the ultimate legitimacy of your church plant is when you have a building, when you have
Yes.
all of these things, and you have a full-time pastor.
Yeah.
And why are those the scorecard of legitimacy when it wasn't really the scorecard of legitimacy biblically?
It's interesting. That is interesting, isn't it? That how
Yeah.
that's become the kind of the standard, right? When you've reached this point, now you're actually a church, right? Versus you may have people in the body that maybe don't qualify as what we would consider like at a pastoral level, right? So
Mhm.
to use biblical language, bishop, elders, and deacons, like from that level, but could be extremely effective of reaching people and being multiplying disciple makers, and could go into a certain context or go
Mhm.
into a certain place and be
Mhm.
very effective in leading. But because that's been the way that we do it, then again, like we said, it has to go back to that. You gotta have that one person who's leading it. And again, I think you said it well, Ken. This is not like, approaching it from the negative side. What we're saying today is we're for we're for all of it. We
Yep.
believe that God is going to move on people to go into specific cities and specific places and to lead. And there is biblical governance. We believe in that. We believe in biblical governance, but we also believe in the operation of the body to consistently be used in the mission. And again, just like culturally, we've highlighted called to preach. Somebody's
Yeah.
called to preach or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I believe that. I believe that God calls people to be effective in communicating the gospel behind a pulpit to a community of believers. I believe that. But I also believe that there are people who may never have that kind of gifting, but can be very effective in the mission, and even in maybe even more effective in the mission, right?
Hmm.
Than just standing behind the pulpit and preaching.
Wouldn't it be awesome? Wouldn't it be awesome if we somehow someday discover a model where the best church planters aren't the best preachers?
Right.
Wouldn't that be awesome? Where it's your ability to craft a sermon has no bearing on your ability to grow a church.
So good,
I
man.
mean, that right there is so crazy because you go back and you go and obviously people who are listening to us, you by bias, you automatically look at that and you go, well, you're talking about your people. No, like go back to people like Spurgeon and whatever. We've got a long, centuries long sort of unfounded bias
Mhm.
that the idea is if you could find the best preachers, the best orators and communicators, they're going to build the biggest, fastest churches. And it's just not biblical.
And what if we could celebrate both? What if we could celebrate and say, "You know what? Man, we need the gifted preachers. We need people that
Sure.
can clearly articulate." Like, we had Raymond Woodward here for district conference and had the conversation. Like, it's the church is abundantly blessed by men and women that are extremely gifted in teaching, that are able to very in such a clear way articulate principles and concepts and values that they're just teachers, right?
Yeah.
That's a gift to the body. Preaching is a gift to the body. What if we looked at it and said, you know what? That I think the hierarchical structure,
Yeah.
like, let's stop looking at
Yeah, yeah,
hierarchical
yeah.
structure and
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
we're
yeah.
gonna elevate preaching to a certain
Yeah.
point,
Yeah.
but
They're no
let's just
greater gift to the body than somebody who's got 40 people that they've reached in the last 6 months,
right,
right?
let's appreciate both and celebrate those that have been called to preach, but celebrate those who may never stand behind a pulpit, but are living on mission and are gathering their neighbors or going into a language group and
Mhm.
gathering people in that group, or people that are effective teachers or whatever that might be. I think that's the key, Ken. I think when we can learn to appreciate and celebrate all of that together,
Yeah.
now all of a sudden it's not a competition. Now all of a sudden it's not like what you said, striving for legitimacy. If I can just pastor a church and get that title, we can be self-supporting and whatever, then we finally arrived. And I
Yeah.
think this is a big reason why most churches average what, 75 in
Yeah.
attendance, because that's the place where they can have a building and they can
Yeah.
support a pastor.
Yeah. And it is interesting. It is interesting because sometimes to emerge out of a deeply entrenched model requires us to be able to emphasize what is a new paradigm. I
Mhm.
think I think it's
Yes.
difficult to honor both
Yes.
equally until somebody comes along and says, "Hey, look, this the institutional Christian church has created an environment. It's your it's your favorite singing group, it's your favorite preacher, it's your favorite whatever, whatever." And it does to some degree, Chris, require us to say, to balance that out doesn't
Sure.
require swinging on the pendulum,
Yeah.
but it does require to say, look, we've overemphasized this a
Yes.
little bit. We've
Yeah.
overemphasized, and because we've overemphasized it, it's 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 handicapped our capacity to release other people, because there are people that say, well, I'm not that, or I can't do that, or I'm not, whatever. And I
Yeah.
think what we really need is we need some models and some examples. I tell the church all the time, look, I can, if the only way that I change our scorecard is
Yeah.
to beat the drum of a values war. These used to be our values, but these are our values now.
Yeah.
Inevitably, you will have people that stand up, dig their heels in, and say, up your
Sure.
nose,
Sure.
I'm holding on to the values. So you can't just have values war and shift the values. The way that you shift a culture to value new things
Mhm.
is by a new scorecard
Yes.
and new stories.
Yes.
And I think I think that there's enough prophecies and enough preaching that's happened in the past that there have been those people that are quote unquote conference preachers who get up and talk about, in these meetings. We've heard it over the years. There will be a day when God's going to use people you've never heard of, and people you don't know, and names known, essentially no name people that have just come from nowhere, and God's going to use those people and God's going to anoint them. We've had those kind of messages preached for years. So what we probably need to do is maybe just embrace that and say, what if that is something that's not coming out of the pool of
Yes.
the professional ministry group?
Yes.
What if that's coming out of the pool of anointed everyday missionaries? And I just want to highlight this one last thing here. Jay Jones said, this is why our podcast go an hour, not because of Jay Jones, but
Blame Jay. It's
Jay,
Jay's
we go
fault.
30 minutes if Jay Jones didn't make good comments. Um, he said one of our church gatherings is meeting weekly in a home,
Yeah.
reproducing disciples,
Yeah.
baptizing them, and praying through to the Holy Ghost, and have attendance between 20 and 30. It's functionally a church. The day that we can embrace that, the day that we in our movement can say, that is as legitimately a church
Yeah. Yeah.
as someone who has filled out an application, met a board, and gone to a city. The
Yeah.
day that we could say that is as much a church as the church plants that are organizationally established, then we're going to be able to honor both.
100%. And I think it's important. I think the reason we've made it kind of a commitment to go after the hard topics and talk about these things is exactly what you said. Like we're not going to swing on the pendulum, but we do want to address the hindrances and the challenges that we faced, which hopefully will create some conversations about, maybe we need to reevaluate some of the things, like you said, the new scorecard, that some of the things that we celebrate. What if we celebrated, instead of just the new building, or, and again, sometimes this gives place to the anti-church people and whatever. And that's not what we're saying at all. We strongly believe in the ecclesiological structure of the church. We believe in it's not just a free for all, and it's not a response against something. What we're saying is we so strongly believe that, especially in the day we're living in, man, we've got to reach our world. We're racing the clock. We've got people, we've got metro areas, Ken, that the methodology is just not going to infiltrate into these places, and be as effective as the kind of the biblical methodology. So look, we want to have conversations about
Mm,
this. How can we be more effective? How
mm,
can we reach people? How can we
hmm,
how can we unleash the army of God's people that are being transformed by his spirit to go back into the world and to reach people, and let that spring up, whatever that looks like, and just be creative and not be critical about those things, and just try to find ways to get the kingdom methodology
mm. And
as deeply entrenched as Western methodology.
man, it's so good. And that's why I think that's why we say, what would an enhanced missional
Mhm,
methodology produce?
mhm.
And so why are we even thinking about that? When we're not thinking about enhanced missional methodology because the old doesn't, because the old is so terrible and broke. There's
Exactly.
no reason to even, let's celebrate, man. Let's celebrate the classic model. But then by the same token, let's take a look at it and say, here's the deal. It doesn't necessarily produce motivated disciples. It's not faster. It's not more flexible. It is a little bit more rigid. It's a slower process, and so on and so forth. And so why don't we say, look, the missional challenge that is before us,
Mhm.
which is, man, there are I mean, the birth rate alone is outpacing church growth rate.
Sure, sure.
So which means every single day the church is getting behind. Ready for this?
Yeah,
Okay. Every single day, the church is getting behind the per capita rate. It's
right.
losing just simply that. And I love what Pastor Tony Richard said. If we recognize these things, I wonder how many churches already exist now.
It's a
I,
great point.
that's such a great point. And I'll close it with this. I'll finish with this because I know you got to run. But here it is. You ready for this?
Yeah,
Crazy.
yeah,
I was talking to. Let me just say this. I was talking to a I was talking to a non-denominational pastor,
okay,
okay, who had all of his life been Baptist. And he wanted to, there was some things that were going on. Okay.
okay,
They had planted, they hadn't planted a church. They had some people in a community that was about 15 or 20 miles from their main campus. And they were really seeing missional traction. People were having people over for pizza. They were getting in their homes. They were connecting. People were bringing people to church. There were people that were getting saved, you know,
sure.
uh, and So he said, so I approached our whatever their Baptist group or they call it a district or whatever,
Yeah.
and said, I want to plant, or he said, or we want to start a church in this community. So they said, okay. So they went through the process and they said, hey, we're not going to let you start that church there. And he said, why? And he said, well, we already have a church there and it's not a real big community and whatever. Okay. And his response was, he said, they said, we already have a church there. And he said, we already have 2 churches there. We've got 40 or 50 people from our church there besides that other brick and mortar church. We've already got, I'm just asking you to formally recognize both. But it was interesting because the idea, Chris, was he was saying, his response was, we've already got a church there. And he said, no, we've already got 2 churches there. He challenged the paradigm by saying,
awesome.
no, you're saying the church is the one who went through your process, filled out your application, was formalized and got your approval. I'm telling you the missional overflow from this congregation, this is an approved church too.
Yeah.
The missional overflow into that community means there's 2 churches there. And he challenged that paradigm. And I'm not going to tell you what the outcome was, but anyway, that's the point.
You can leave it to your own imagination on that one,
Your own
right?
imagination.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Well, once again, we've proven that the 30-minute podcast is not an option, and it's Jay Jones' fault is what we discovered today in this. So thank you, Jay. Appreciate you being the scapegoat for that. So we do appreciate everybody bearing with us today, being a little bit behind, and all the great comments and discussion. Hopefully this spurs some conversations, discussions. We'd love to definitely talk about that. We'd love for you to check us out at the DillinghamGroup.org, all of our social media sites. If there's anything we can do to help you launch a missional movement, let us know. We'd love to connect with you. Appreciate everybody being a part today. We look forward to coming back next Tuesday around 10 o'clock for a 30-minute podcast. Until then,